here it is. This is the line that we were talking about. 80% of you, so who is you, wanted us to begin producing paid expansion content for survival mode. Yeah, the TLD news I think is really, really promising for just like the lifespan of the game. I was really tempted to pull that up and read that on stream. I'm kind of tempted to do it now that I've said it. So there's actually some really cool stuff that, especially as like a game developer, I'm definitely picking out. 10 years since I submitted the incorporation documents. They just separated survival mode and story mode, which is going to be really nice for them in terms of troubleshooting. And I think it remains to be seen how much time that's going to save in terms of, like what their turnaround is now going to be for bugs, because it has been such a short amount of time since they've done that. But it could be possible that we start to see much, much faster turnaround and much cleaner support for survival and for story. And it could be that it's not super dramatic, but it's still a pretty big improvement, especially for them. But yeah, they did sandbox mode without that being part of the Kickstarter promises. And so one of the reasons that they have to do this, and so on the dev side, there are some game developers who've been taken to court and sued for not actually providing all of the things that they said they would in their Kickstarters. And so it's contractual, right? And so they've promised these 5 episodes. And so that's what they have to do. They have to do these. And I don't think they're probably terribly worried about fans of the game turning around and suing them, because the community really does love what they do. The community is really behind them. But they're also trying to put out really quality episodes. And so there's this give and this take, right? On the one hand, they want to give the best quality story that they can, but on the other, they have to make this. And so they can't just do it as something different. They can't just do it as like The Long Dark 2, even though they've made such a huge amount of content. 80% of the community, I thought this was really interesting. They polled the community and 80% are happy paying for updates to Sandbox. And I'm really curious to know more about that data, like and what specifically they were asking and who they were asking. But yeah, so they've been fulfilling promises to the backers. And yeah, the backer promises meant that we have updated the game for free since we launched it, despite the scope and successes in each. And so, yeah, what they had promised was a 10-hour narrative-driven survival game and no sandbox. So they're kind of tied to that promise, but they've kind of also fulfilled that promise several times over. If you don't know me, like I got into this purely, like I got into streaming last year, almost a year ago, purely so that I could understand it better for my students. And so I'm really interested in data, and I'm really interested in how different streams grow and what the science is behind that. And one of the things you'll notice is that, I'm studying this for game developers as well. There's a huge, huge boost that they get from the streamers that aren't necessarily playing this every day, but still get something like 1,000 or even 10,000 concurrent viewers. They get huge, huge streamers in here, which is going to be such a bigger boost to visibility, because folks who are in here every day are often streamers themselves, or I won't say they're more niche, but they're in here to learn how to play the game. But there's this whole other community that follows streamers that will go into story games like Carnage or Stacy of Stacy's Grape Soda fame. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Just shout out, how you doing, DC? Yeah, like, that's something that Joey Freshwater says all the time too, that absolutely in a heartbeat I'd pay for the sandbox stuff. And hey, Ham, how you doing? Yeah, so there's a lot here, and I think ultimately for folks who are streamers in the TLD space, like we just love Sandbox and we play the absolute bejesus out of it, we are going to be in a really good spot with a game that constantly gets updated, and maybe even a better spot, because as these updates roll out, it's going to bring a lot of attention. And so what I was getting to is that if you look at though the stats, a lot of the expansion in audience that the game gets to actually drive a lot of sales is coming from story, because that's when really big streamers with tons of viewers come in who, these are the folks that wouldn't necessarily play a survival game, but it's just so many more people than what you find with the day to day. But I would be really curious. I'm actually really curious about some of their data and what the proportion is of Sandbox to story mode players, and where the time is getting spent, if that's something that they can track. And maybe that's something that they've been tracking, maybe that's something they just set up to track. But I don't know if anyone has seen Raf talk about that, or anyone talk about that at Hinterland. I'd be really curious, because just like I like stats. Right. And so that's true, Dane. You get a lot of those folks, and a lot of them are going to be story mode, but you also get folks who stick. And so both are really useful, both in terms of the business plan for Hinterland are probably, I don't know. I'm really curious if they're equally as large, or if one is larger than the other. Here it is. This is the line that we were talking about, I was really eager to come back to. 80% of you, so who is you, wanted us to begin producing paid expansion content for survival mode. And so they're saying here, like, we've always felt fortunate there's a core group asking for us to start changing content for a while. So are they primarily polling the core group, or are they looking at folks like you, DC, or Joey Freshwater, and streamers who are saying, this is something I would pay for? How deeply has this been focus tested across the board? Because while on the face, I think this is true, right? This is something that really benefits streamers. Is it something that your average gamer tuning into Twitch or looking at the Xbox Game Pass, is someone going to play this on Game Pass with all the expanded content and then go back and buy a season pass? And so I'm really curious about the data. I think this is pretty hands off, but it does feel really genuine. Like, I don't think this is anyone at Hinterland trying to be, roundabout. I think that this is just like, and I believe this, but I wonder if there's a bit more clarity that they have to, I'm curious. That's all. Like, there's no reason for them to share that. That's not like, and data like that, to be totally honest, is so valuable. It's worth so many dollars. From what they're saying here, there's two like different pathways. MS Paint to the rescue. Create new. Oh, cool. I said MS Paint in the title, and it just filled in MS Paint. Thanks, OBS. You actually rock today. So, like, say you're buying DLC and there's a piece of DLC that happens in March, a piece of DLC that happens in June, a piece of DLC that drops in December, and then another in March of the next year, right? And you buy one of these, it's $5, $5, $5, $5. Whereas season pass, you buy here in February, and then you're just going to get all of this. as time goes by, but you'll pay maybe like $15 for the season pass instead of $5 for each DLC. But then what's also going to happen is like if you're on Game Pass in maybe December, you're going to get TLD on Game Pass with all the DLC, and you'll if you're paying $1 for the sale on Game Pass, then you're paying $1 for all of this, or you're paying $10 for Game Pass or whatever. Does that make sense, Mel? Sorry, this was a little bit of like spooling up to set up paint. Yeah, there's real forethought, and I don't know how much it I would rate it as psychology so much as market research. So them actually separating the two could have been a really major catalyst for Raf writing this. He maybe like it's possible they were waiting for that to actually be finalized before they really started to announce this stuff, because now they've got probably a trajectory and different teams located to this. They're probably already work and maybe have already been working on this. New challenges, new mechanics, which, like I said, will be really interesting for those of us who are streaming the game, because whereas before we're waiting for those big story mode up, like story mode coming out, like episode 1, episode 2, to bring a lot of people in, we potentially could see a lot of folks coming in to play the game at each of these, and it could be really huge for sustained interest from folks who do like playing survival mode. Like if I had never started streaming this, I did still like TLD and I would play it in the summer and around Christmas time. And I would probably see this and think, like, all right, well, I like this game. Let's do it. And if I wanted to see some of that stuff, I might look at Twitch, like, okay, what does this look like? Um, do I want, is this worth the $5? I think is where a lot of consumer thinking is. And honestly, probably even some streamer thinking, like, is this something that I'm actually going to enjoy? Do I want to pay for this? Yeah, and there should be some free stuff as well. Well, and also Ham that they're going to keep updating it so that folks will continue to get like quality of life updates. So they won't have to buy the DLC just to have, a good experience, which yeah. Yeah. And that's what he's saying here actually. Yeah. So, and it is different from them releasing things for free, and it is a good financial move. It like microtransaction puts them, in DLC and season pass. And it's not necessarily microtransaction, that's the wrong word. They are using the words DLC and season pass. But if they get to that point where they're adding in things like microtransactions, what we've seen with Elden Ring is that could turn a lot of people seriously off. I think this will turn some people off. There's just no way to go from giving something out for free to saying, like, okay, so we're going to charge for this part now. There's no part of that people, everyone just says, oh, yeah, yeah, sounds reasonable. So, again, my question with like when they're talking about the core audience, that's 80% of folks would be willing to pay. Who are they talking about exactly? But I think it will help, and I think it'll help. Yeah. And Dane, I think you're absolutely right. It's really going to depend on the DLCs. Like, what is it? If it's maps and features and items, yeah, a lot of new players don't even go into the new maps. But I think there's a strong community of folks who have spent a lot of time in HRV, spent a lot of time in Ash Canyon, spent a lot of time in Blackrock now, and they're ready for that next thing. And it could really, just in the way Wands has been playing No One Gets Out of Blackrock alive, it's possible that you'll see folks pretty exclusively streaming some of these new zones and maybe getting even more viewers than they have already, because folks are trying to decide constantly, like on an ongoing basis. People will be coming into streams and saying, like, do I want to buy this? is this something I want to throw down $5 for? There's another really interesting analogy that goes around among game developers, and it's like the cup of coffee test. So this has actually been pretty thoroughly worked out with the data. It's about the price of a cup of coffee, but if you can get someone to think about like a DLC or a full game in terms of, $5, the price of going to Starbucks, the price of an espresso. If you're at like work or a games convention or whatever it is, you're probably buying other people cups of coffee all the time. And so if you can start to think about it in those terms, that's the point at which people start to just pay for games and pay for DLC. But there's still a big contingent of folks playing games who have a really fun time trying to get around that. And so that's a big draw to free to play games is how can I play in such a way? Can I use my skill to get around having to pay $5? But yeah, $5 for a map, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And something like that, because we know that it's what was it, 50, $60,000 to do one unique structure or one big unique set piece in TLD. And a new map is what? Like is a new map like 250K or 500K? He put it into numbers at one point, Raf did. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it's expensive. It's, you can't just say, "Hey, I'm gonna pay the studio like $1,000 to do this feature," because they cost so much more than that. Like it's, like you have so many different kinds of costs that can really easily get out of hand. And so this is really interesting. I'm handing over leadership to Katie Sorrell, who has personally designed every region from Pleasant Valley onward and led the development of Wintermute as the lead designer. 30-year game design veteran. I feel like I've heard her name, but I haven't met Katie. I don't know anything about her besides what Raf is saying here. Um, but it sounds like she has the chops. It sounds like she has the experience to make it happen. And I'm surprised he hasn't moved on to. I would be. Uh, he says here he's actually gonna, you know, not wander off into the sunset, but he's gonna go out into his cabin in the woods. And oh no, I'm heading to a quiet and hopefully fruitful creative period. Sorry, I put a little extra dash of drama on that so I can attempt to come up with something with even greater longevity and impact than the long dark. And it'll be difficult. But I feel like I could be wrong, but he I feel like he's made noises about having already started on something. And I know at the very least they've done some hiring for multiplayer roles, which is not something they've said they will ever do for TLD. So it feels like they've already done hiring, which makes me think that there is sort of a clear idea of where they're going. But there's still lots of things you could do creatively. And I'm curious, like, if I put this, I mean, this is on the internet already, but Raf, if you're watching this, how much has already been started? And no, don't tell me, because I know that announcing those is no small thing. So I really suspect that whatever the case there, anything that is or is not yet under development is going to be kept pretty close to the vest. Like they're going to be pretty tight-lipped about that. I turn my thoughts to new horizons and the next Hinterland decade, because it has been a decade. And so he's, yeah. A lot of folks were saying it sounded like super emotional, and I guess maybe I'm an automaton. Like it feels a lot more like, to me, like it feels a little bit not business, that's not the right word. But what am I trying to say? Conversational, like, but also conversational in a way that is really informed and really making nods to people who understand the game but also understand the business side. Yeah, no, Dane, I agree. I don't think he's thinking about selling it, and he's definitely not leaving it. Like, he owns it, right? And so he's still going to be really hands on. And I would be really surprised if he didn't have a lot of presence in TLD. Like, he's still scripting the last episode of Wintermute, but he's really involved, and I think we'll still see him a lot on Twitter. I wonder how much we'll see Katie on Twitter, and if it'll be a similar level of depth that we get. But yeah, like, I do think he's really excited to start a new thing. Like, the tone of it is really retrospective. But if I know when I'm starting on much smaller projects, and I mostly make just tiny poetry games and just like silly little things. But when that first little creative um that creative shot hits me, it's like an e-stim, right? Like in the game. And I'm going, and I'm really creatively charged, and I really just like want to brook no distractions. I just want to sink my teeth in and go. Anyway, these are my totally unfounded, like, just ramblings about what I read